Before there was MAGA, there was the Southern Strategy. This Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern on episode 75 of Politically Conscious, we asked, was Trump a political revolution or simply Nixon's playbook updated for a new generation? From law and order politics to culture wars and voter realignment, we're exposing the strategy that transformed the Republican Party and still shapes America today. Live on the Mental Dialogue YouTube page. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. What's up, everybody? We are live on episode 75 of Politically Conscious. I got my brother Leo Smith in here, coming from the right side of things. Y'all should be surprised if you're a regular watcher, viewer. Thank y'all for the viewership going up, 6,000 viewers last week. So definitely thank y'all for y'all support. But y'all should be surprised that Mel, my right-hand man, coming from the left side of things, is not able to be here today. So we're gonna do this show one wing it, as we do our Politically Conscious show, where if you're tired of the propaganda, you listen to us. So Leo, if you will, give them your background as we get into today's topic, talking about the Republican playbook, where that we see today. Where did it span from? But before we get into that, tell them who you are, brother.
Sure, great. I'm Leo Smith. I call myself a center-left conservative. Center-right conservative. Center-right conservative with some civil rights engagement. But I was former strategist with the Republican National Committee, former executive with the Georgia Republican Party, and now after 13 years, I've got a government relations and public affairs company, Engaged Futures Group, government relations, lobbying, public policy advocacy, that sort of work.
Nice, perfect. Well, I consider you a political expert. I love to moderate on this show. I may have to participate a little more than normal since we are missing our left wing of things. There's this one. Let me throw this out because it's just popping in my head right now before I play our first clip for anybody out there watching. We basically show y'all political clips from around social media and give you as best our straight no chaser perspective on it. Today we're going to kind of have a historical conversation more so than having clips about what's currently happening in politics. So just giving y'all that heads up. But here's a thought that always pops in my head where people say that politics, and I may get the quote wrong or whatever, but politics is basically a two-headed bird or something. Have you heard that quote used quite often when it comes to politics? Where people
I heard so many quotes in politics, but I think right, a bird with two heads, a single bird with two heads, or something to that effect. But that's the message, right?
You ever heard that? I was curious. I hate that quote personally. I just want to say that before I start this show, before we go into the history. I personally hate that quote because I think throughout history, when I study politics, I see two sides, and there have been points in history, three sides that are literally battling it out for resources, and so they are not two heads on the same winged bird or whatever. From my perspective, I'm just curious from your perspective. Do you see politics? The area I do see that in is how both parties spend money. I think they're the same in that regard. But other than that, I don't think that politics is one bird with two heads, or however that quote goes.
Right. Well, I think that from the perspective of the common person, the reality is politics is really the tool that's most easily wielded by the wealthy, the engaged, the insiders. And so when it comes to the elite, if you're looking from bottom up and you're looking at the elite, yes, that's when the money has a play, and it seems like they all are using the same strategies, these elites, these lawyers from political firms, from private equity, from Wall Street, the Rockefellers to the Nixons. But, so there's a divide there. That looks like two birds, the haves and the have-nots, right? Then but the real, from a policy side, from an ideology side, there really is more than one bird with two heads. I mean, it's actually liberals, right, versus conservatives, and in the traditional modern sense. I mean, those people who sort of believe that sort of a postmodern, whatever, let people sort of do their thing no matter how it affects society, but make sure that people get stuff too from the government. The government is there to fix things. That's the liberal perspective. Money can be printed. We should not have any poverty because we can just print more money. Liberal perspective, money, 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 but never really any solutions or order. Then the conservative side, maintain social order, make sure that you have morals or virtue leading you, that there are truths in lives that we need to stand on. These truths comes from our tested traditions, these kinds of things. And I guess as we dig into Nixon today, we'll to some of those things and how that played up into not only party identification, but how even the ideology gets tested sometimes. And it makes sense that people want the simplistic, right? The simplistic is the cute quotes we can come up with, but politics is a lot more nuanced.
No, absolutely. And I would always offer, generally speaking, again, I wish I actually just popped in my head. So I wish I had the actual quote. I may look it up while we're playing one of the clips. But just to say this, and we'll get into the clips, that particular quote is almost basically to disregard politics. That's why people use that actual quote. And what we've highlighted on Politically Conscious, we're hoping that we raise the conscious level for people to understand how politics affect them, whether you are in the elite or not in the elite, or if you're on the left or if you're on the right, to actually understand how politics works. Because what I often say is some things that politics provides or have become so common that we actually disregard them as if we didn't get nothing, but they're actually provided because of politics, and because they're so common, we don't look at it as we got something from politics. We'll say we got nothing when there's a lot of things specifically provided to us, whether you're on the left or right, from politics. So that's just something I wanted to throw out. But let's get into today's discussion, and we'll start here.
Why the right says the political party switch never happened. The right will tell you the Republicans freed the slaves. The right will tell you the Democrats founded the Hood and Burning Cross crowd. They'll try to convince you that the parties never switched platforms. There's a psychological reason for that. Ziva Kundra, psychologist at the University of Waterloo, studied how people process information that threatens what they want to believe. She called it motivated reasoning. The brain doesn't evaluate evidence objectively. It starts with the conclusion it needs to be true and works backwards. The brain only sees the facts that support the already deeply held conclusion and ignores everything else. And conservatives need the party switch to be a myth. Because if the party switch did happen, that means Republicans are the political heir to the Confederacy, to racism, and they know it. So here's what actually happened. In 1964, our Democratic president, Lyndon B. Johnson, signed the Civil Rights Act into law. That night he told his aide, Bill Moyers, "I think we just delivered the South to the Republican Party for a long time to come." And he was right. The second the Democrats became the party of civil rights, the racists left. They didn't just leave on their own. The Republican Party aggressively recruited them. Richard Nixon's team developed what they called the Southern Strategy, a deliberate plan to win white Southern voters by exploiting their rage over civil rights, not with hoods and burning crosses, with dog whistles, the promise of law and order, states' rights, and the silent majority. And it worked. The party didn't just gain new voters, it adopted their politics. Small government, states' rights, opposition to federal civil rights enforcement. The entire racist platform of the Southern Democrats became the platform of the Republican Party. That is the party switch conservatives deny, but it most definitely happened. By the late 1970s, the entire political leadership of the South had flipped from Democrat to Republican. The same states that flew the Confederate flags as Democrats started flying them as Republicans. The same states that opposed civil rights as Democrats now oppose civil rights as Republicans. The geography didn't change. The hatred didn't change. The party label did. Barry Goldwater said it himself in 1961. Republicans were not going to win the black vote, so they went hunting where the ducks were. The ducks were white Southern racists. So when someone tells you the parties never switched, ask them this one question. Why does the Republican Party of Lincoln now own the Confederate flag?
Leo, I'll let you jump in where you fit in as the right side leaning pundit on this show. Your thoughts about that clip? What do you think is correct about it? What do you think is wrong about it? Obviously, this guy is Lucas Bean. To give him his credit, he's given his perspective on what happened supposedly in the 60s with Nixon, if you will. What are your thoughts on what you heard?
I'm not going to say this to discount the gentleman. I don't know anything about him, but I almost guarantee you he's not from the South, because he has you can't say that Nixon came up with the Southern strategy when Nixon is post Goldwater. It's really Goldwater who came up with the Southern strategy. It's just that one of Nixon's political wrote a book about it, like in 1969, when the crap had already gone down on this strategy to take advantage of Southern disgruntledness about civil rights legislation. But that part is correct. I mean, that Democrats, basically were against civil rights. And Republicans pulled in a lot of those people when that happened. The Republicans in the South pulled in a lot of those disgruntled Democrats. And so that part is true. I mean, so if one were to ask me which party more is attached to Southern disgruntledness about civil rights, certainly it's the Republican Party then and today. Post 1968, when Nixon won his second election. But Nixon actually came in as someone who, at first, again, you got to remember, he's from California, right? He was a moderate conservative. He didn't want to be seen as a racist. But because of what Goldwater and others had already laid out, because of the Ronald Reagan stuff popping around in the California competitions, Nixon having lost, and as some of you may know, Nixon lost several races in California. He lost a race for governor. So he's now going, what do I need to do in order to get traction? And so the way politics work, 50% plus one, you're looking for small advantages, small pools of voters. And so that disgruntled Southern Democrat was a small pool of voter everybody was fighting for. Goldwater had already shown the way, to get that person. You had George Wallace, the open segregationist, racist, throwing out stuff. And he had several successful campaigns for political offices. And so Nixon's watching that and going, okay, I've lost several times now. What do I need to do? Let me act like a racist. Okay, let me intimate. And, today we're very familiar with that. I don't think Nixon wanted to be a racist because he had to decide to do it. He had to decide to do it.
I understand exactly what you mean.
Do something is not natural to you. So, and that's what politics now is so fascinating to look at what politics are today. When you look at a J.D. Vance, who seemed like an anti-racist in his young before he became a senator, but then said, how do I get relevance? And so, let me intimate that I'm a racist. and then Trump will like me, and others who like Trump will like me, and then I can get relevance. Nixon made the same move. He did not like Goldwater. Goldwater was probably committed as a segregationist and a racist in his head, but just intellectual enough to a segregationist is for low intellectual people. And so
you have to speak up a little bit because you're a little low for me, so you may be low for the audience.
All right, good. No. So I was just saying that Goldwater, was kind of a highbrow intellectual, and so therefore his racism, he continued it. His public racism, Goldwater would question, but libertarianism allowed Goldwater the idea that you can be racist not because you're racist, because you believe in the modality of life. And Black people, even if you believe that they deserve equality, but social adaptation is not to their advantage because they're in a land foreign to themselves and they've been in slavery. So of course they can't be equal to us. Wow. So that's sort of a libertarian idea that justifies racism, and they will say not based on race, just because of natural law. Right? Nixon wasn't down with all that, to be quite honest with you. But then he saw a voting bloc that was voting for that kind of stuff. And he was like, okay, let me play the game.
How do I co-op? And right now I'm about to play a clip that kind of debunks some of the Southern strategy from the way that it's always taught, from what the Lucas Bean just said. But before I play the clip, I think it's an opportunity, again, politically conscious. Politics makes for strange bedfellows. Period, point blank. Reason that matters for our audience, again, if our goal is to raise the consciousness of our people when it comes to understanding how politics works for them, then you also must understand as Leo has pointed out, because I didn't know Nixon's background to the degree that you just explained, right? But I definitely accept how, like you said, his natural disposition is far from what he ended up doing to adopt and go after a voting bloc. I'll say to anybody from our community watching, you don't just simply say, see, that's what happened. You actually take it and learn. For when you're fighting for your resources, there will be times where you will have to make a strange bedfellow for a period of time, make a coalition, because I promise you, King and the Big Six quite often made coalitions with people that would call them nigger once they left the room. So I'm just kind of making that point that we're just talking through the reality of this conversation today, not just simply going, see what America has always done. That's not what me and Leo are doing here. We're talking about, one, what was actually done and how can we learn from it. That's the challenge to everybody watching. All right, let me play this next clip that gives a different viewpoint on the Southern strategy.
Hi guys, this video is on Nixon's Southern strategy. And the importance of this strategy, according to the left, is that it was part of a sneaky Republican tactic to win over the racists in the South and in the Democratic Party over to the Republican Party. And the Bible, if you will, of Nixon's so-called Southern strategy is Kevin Phillips' book, The Emerging Republican Majority. Now, Phillips says on really the first page of that book that his book was not the Bible of the Southern strategy. In fact, he denies the book was even used by the Nixon campaign at all. In fact, he points out it was published after the campaign had been formulated and largely executed. It had nothing to do with Nixon's strategy. Moreover, Kevin Phillips goes on to argue, and others have as well, that Nixon didn't really have a Southern strategy. Because think about it. If Nixon was appealing to the racists of the Deep South, how would he do that? He'd have to make racist statements to them and court them in a racist way. But no leftist has been able to produce a single public campaign statement by Nixon that is racist. Could he secretly have communicated with the racist South? Well, the left says, yeah, he used racist dog whistles. Now, let's think about this for a minute. A dog whistle is a sound that is so high-pitched that only dogs can hear it. So apparently Nixon was communicating with the racists by making these so-called sounds that apparently the rest of us, including the media, could not decipher. In fact, we couldn't even hear it. Only the racists with their dog ears could figure out what Nixon is saying. I think you can see how downright stupid this is. The truth of the matter is that Nixon had a Sun Belt strategy. Nixon's Sun Belt strategy targeted not the South, but the great Sun Belt stretching from Florida, continuing through some of the South, but then moving through the West, Arizona, Colorado, California. And Nixon targeted the southern and western cities, Tampa, Raleigh, Houston, Phoenix, San Diego, and Nixon's home state of California. Nixon knew that the cities were the least racist part of the South, and Nixon was hoping that upwardly mobile Southerners who were not racist, but who were patriotic, anti-communist, free market, supported law and order, would defect over from the Democratic into the Republican camp. This is in fact what happened. Nixon lost the Deep South, but he won the urban part of the Sun Belt, and that was enough to win many of the Sun Belt states. That's the truth about Nixon's Southern strategy. It wasn't even a Southern strategy. It was a Sun Belt strategy that was not racist and was successful.
Fascinating. Because I don't generally agree with D'Souza, who I've met personally times when he was trying to come up in the Republican Party. I think he is an immigrant who advantage, exploiting identity politics in America in the worst way by saying he hates identity politics while he encourages identity politics. I mean, so it's he's a fascinating guy, but I think that's one of the problems of American history from an immigrant's perspective, is because they don't really understand the nuances. But I agree with him. I mean, he basically agreed with me, right, that Nixon really didn't define and create the Southern strategy. So he is right. That's the best thing about disinformation, is that it has some information. So he agreed with me, disagreeing with the other gentleman, that no, it's not really Nixon. Yes, it was assigned to Nixon because it's a good attack to say that someone's a racist. And so that's not new. So it was assigned, but it was really Goldwater and those people who came up with the Southern strategy. So, and Nixon was, he confirms that what I said, that Nixon was somewhat a moderate, basically, but then use that method. And when you connect with urban Southerners, these are the Southerners like Buckhead Republicans or Miami Southerners that have more money and more education, but they don't want to let on that they still have this sort of this white identity fear, that they're too educated to let that on. So Nixon had to figure out how to connect with that block, and he did it. Now I'm going to add another little background and color to this whole thing about Nixon. And I think your audience, our listeners, will love this connection. Nixon was also a person who did not hate the snobby elite. I mean, he hated the snobby elites. He was a person who, he wasn't poor, but he was a hardworking, working class family upbringing, middle class family upbringing. He wanted to go to Harvard. He couldn't afford to. So he ended up going to a different college because he couldn't afford Harvard. He went later to Duke for grad school. But again, here's a guy who's looking at the Ivy and going, these snooty, rich elites that I can't really hang with, right? Who does that sound like? Sounds like Donald Trump, right? So he takes an attitude where, in a way, he was like, I don't really give a crap about these elite intellectuals, and yet he has to then go and figure out how to get their votes, right?
Politics.
It's politics.
The epitome of politics.
Right.
Yep. And if I can highlight, I'll say this again. We try to weed through the propaganda. So, as a matter of fact, when somebody kind of agrees, we said that this doesn't really debunk the Southern strategy. Dave D'Souza, Dinesh D'Souza, went to prison for fraud as a dishonest player. I always tell people, let's talk about the idea and not necessarily attack the person, but it is good context. So thank you for that comment. So that's why we put it up. I'll also highlight, when you're watching these clips, whether it's the left or right, when you start calling people stupid and say, oh, that's a stupid idea, when they start saying that, that's when there's propaganda. Because he goes, look, he didn't win the South. So look how stupid that is, because he's leaving out that who won the South the election? The hard segregationists won it. Just Wallace won the South.
Wallace. Yeah.
So
he wasn't. Yeah. So that's kind of D'Souza's point. He wasn't racist. Nixon wasn't racist enough. Right.
Okay. Maybe I misunderstood the context.
D'Souza would like it if you were just outright racist.
Well, what the thing is, though, he said, this is how I took his context, and we'll go to the next clip. Okay. But the way I took his context, he was saying just it's a stupid idea to even say that there was a Southern strategy, because look, he didn't
which is ridiculous. I mean, right, which is ridiculous again. But that's that's D'Souza
watching. When you're hearing a clip, even from your side, once your side starts saying the other side is stupid, best believe your propaganda antenna should go up, is my point, if that even makes sense right now.
Absolutely. Anytime. I mean, it's just like, they always say that the person who wants to physically fight is intellectually weak, right? The person who wants to, you're having beef with them, you're debating, and then they want to go and fight, or they start calling you names. Right. Those are the intellectually weak people. Right? Because they don't really have a way of debating you, or they don't have a good sound argument. So they just get to name calling. D'Souza does the same stuff with his Princeton education. Right.
And so since I'm going to point out how to be aware of propaganda for all.
That's right. Anthony Ross is on point with a lot of his comments, right? Liat Water.
Right. And that's where we're going next. And this is a very short clip that highlights that there was a Southern strategy, even though quite often social media has, to a degree, incorrectly associated with Nixon, and people like D'Souza say, "Oh, there was no Southern strategy," which is still BS. And this clip will kind of show it right here.
Right.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. All right, I won't do it. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
So that clip basically is Lee Atwater, big time strategist for Reagan. So again, not necessarily attaching it to Nixon per se, but D'Souza, highlights, oh, this is a stupid thought. And oh, a dog whistle can't even be heard by the rest of us. I'm just talking about the propaganda aspect, because again, this is what this show is. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. So I'm highlighting how much propaganda was in D'Souza's clip, because yes, we understand that a dog whistle by a dog can't be heard by humans, but let's not act like they're not dog whistles used in politics.
I would think that D'Souza, Montoya, is that if you ask him to define dog whistle, the thing that he's rejecting, right? He's rejecting the idea of dog whistle. But if you ask D'Souza to define a dog whistle, I guarantee you he can't define it.
Wow.
Because it is a concept in America's psychosocial development.
Okay, I see.
As an immigrant, he can't connect to America's psychosocial development.
That makes sense.
I'm not being racist against immigrants.
No, I don't even hear that. What I hear is I actually hear you, because if you're just highlighting his context, where he comes from, he just can't recognize it. So you don't even understand that. So I see what you're saying.
It's like why? It's by the same reason why
being intentional. You're correcting me, saying he just don't get it. Is what you're basically.
He just doesn't get it. Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't get it. Most Asian Americans who said yes to being against affirmative action, they don't get it. These things are part of the DNA. When I say to someone, the soul of Black people, right? East Indian guy ain't gonna know what that means. Right. When I say to someone, yes, I'm transcendent about my relationships, but there's something about a sister and that sister girl swagger. There's some attractiveness to that. An East Indian guy ain't gonna understand that.
I see what you're saying.
That's an American Black thing.
I'm glad, this is why this dialogue is so, because again, I'm actually being accusatory of him, and you're just like, he doesn't have the context to not ignorant. Say it the way he said it. Yeah,
he's a highly intelligent, really quantitatively smart person, right? Who is culturally ignorant.
That makes sense. Same as when we go to other places, we're ignorant about custom and tradition.
I go to Scotland and I don't understand the difference between the Scots and the Wales, and people from Wales and people from Wales. I don't even know that Wales is a country because I don't know that much about the UK. I want to make some dumb mistakes when I, call football and whatever, and if I go there and I'm looking for certain types of food and I order it wrong, and, I don't understand the importance of rugby and what is a prop. A prop is not a thing in Hollywood theater in Los Angeles. A prop is an important position on the rugby field, cultural knowledge.
Makes sense. And so last thing I'll say about the Atwater clip is this, is I absolutely know in 79, Ronald Reagan ran hard with it, using the language that we just talked, the abstract language that Leo Atwater said. Clearly by the 60s, you couldn't do it. So clearly by the time you get to 79 and the 80s and Reagan running, they were masterful at the language that I would offer is the American dog whistle in politics. And I'm not saying today we're talking about the Republican playbook. Dog whistles are used all kind of ways inside of politics, because at the end of the day, just like we said, when Nixon, for example, had to figure out how to get those he didn't even like to vote for him, he's going to go to a rally and use the language as necessary, even if he doesn't really feel that way. Like, that's the reality of politics sometimes when you're trying to get enough votes. Again, I'm just keep pointing that out. This is what this dialogue is about.
History repeats itself.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let me go to a quick commercial. We're halfway through the show. And this is just highlighting for those in Atlanta who know about the Mental Dialogue Community Club, which you see behind my head. We have an event every third Friday. So I'm going to play a quick 30-second commercial, and we're going to come back with more cuts for you. Atlanta, what if everything you've been taught about race is wrong? Friday, June 19th at 7 p.m., the Mental Dialogue Live experience tackles one explosive question. What if the world only had one race? Join diversity consultant Latrice Ross and special guest Brother Unk of the Pseudo Killers for a night of bold ideas, challenging conversations, and real networking. Got a business? Take the mic during our live business break and pitch the crowd. Donation entry, free parking, stop scrolling, start thinking, and Mental Dialogue Live experience. All I'm asking is that you think. So, yep, if you're in Atlanta every third Friday, we have the smartest networking event in the city. Go to mentaldialogue.com for details. Definitely want you to come out and join us if you can. Let me see. We got a couple comments here. Let me see. This is the greatest trick. All right, let me see if I say. They going hard at each other. I don't really play too many. We're not about attacking people on this show. So if you're attacking one another, I'm definitely not putting your comment up. All right, it is what it is. But it definitely welcome the comments. But we don't attack the person. We talk ideas on this show. All right. So with that said, here's a brother I've had on my previous Mental Dialogue talk show when we were on Blog Talk audio only. Brother by the name of Freddie Taylor. He's actually the owner of Urban Intellectuals. And so he ran this clip on his page recently. It's two parts. So we're going to use one at the time. We'll talk about it. And I also want to highlight something that his company is going through, because I want to support his company. So today is a double opportunity. We're doing our politically conscious, and I want to highlight for anybody else that may want to support. I'm just giving a heads up. Support Urban Intellectuals. Please consider what you hear at the end of both of these clips. We're going to just do one of them for now. And this is going directly into today's conversation.
Before Donald Trump, there was Richard Nixon. Let's talk about the 8 ways that he undermined Black America. And if you want to understand how modern anti-Black politics works, you have to understand Richard Nixon's playbook. Because Nixon did not just always have to say the quiet part out loud. He used phrases like law and order. He used words like crime. He used terms like welfare. He talked about neighborhood schools. He talked about states' rights. And all of it sounded neutral. But underneath the language was a political strategy that helped turn Black progress into threat. So let's talk about the 8 ways Nixon undermined Black America. Number 1, he weaponized law and order. See, Nixon ran on law and order during a time when Black people were protesting, organizing, demanding civil rights, and pushing this country to live up to its own promises. Sound familiar? But instead of addressing the conditions, he created unrest. He turned Black protests into urban frustration, into a crime narrative. That language was not just about safety, it was about fear. It was about making Black demand for justice look like disorder. Number 2, he helped mainstream the Southern strategy. After the Civil Rights Movement, politicians could not always use openly racist language the same way, so they shifted. They shifted about states' rights. They talked about crime. They talked about busing. They talked about control, local control. Nixon's campaign helped court white voters who were angry about civil rights, who were angry about integration, the federal protection for Black people. That strategy reshaped American politics for generations. Number 3, he launched the modern war on drugs. In 1971, Nixon declared drug abuse public enemy number 1. But the policies that followed did not address addiction. they helped build a system of surveillance, policing, raids, criminalization, and incarceration that would later devastate the black community. The war on drugs became one of the most destructive policy frameworks in modern black life. Number 4, his own administration understood the political value of criminalizing black communities. See, years later, Nixon aide John Ehrlichman claimed the administration knew it could not make it illegal to be black or anti-war, but could associate black people with heroin and anti-war activists with marijuana, then criminalize both. Now historians debate parts of that quote, but here is what is not debatable. The war on drugs became a political weapon, and black communities paid the ultimate price.
I've read that Ehrlichman quote myself, and it absolutely was the start of the war on drugs. And most of us in the modern times have no clue that the war on drugs started really technically in 69, because that quote is from 69. Mm-hmm. It became explicit that we're going to do something about the marijuana problem in 71. But the insight behind it from my research is Nixon, like most presidents, huge ego, right? So once you have a taste of power, you want to keep that power. So he's had the election. He wants to be reelected. It went as far as him, losing his presidency because of he was so power hungry, if you will. That's a side note. But back to the point that I'm making is he felt that the anti-war activists and the black people were his enemies. That's why Freddie Taylor, I feel like, correctly points out that he went after those two groups because he felt like they could cost him his next election. That's how I feel. That's my context of researching the Nixon, because he recorded everything, is the only reason we even know that what I'm saying. The only reason we know what I'm saying is because he, at the time, he had his obsession with recording everything is the only reason we know the insight, because most presidents wouldn't have recorded themselves in this way for us to even know that he wanted to go after blacks and anti-war people to keep his power. Like, again, this is my context. A lot of you have probably never heard, but I remember when I first found it and researched it from my perspective as thoroughly as I could, that's the conclusion I came through, because at the time I was surprised. I grew up thinking the war on drugs started in the 80s. So that's why I did a deep dive on it to find out, okay, dang, this started in, and then I started watching how the law and order changed in the 70s versus what up until that time, crime rates were about the same for all different demographics. In the 70s, it still kind of was, but it slowly started changing because of the policing that I would say Nixon ushered in, because it was a political strategy. It was never about safety of Americans. It was about, can we make it easier to lock up my enemies, which included the hippies and the blacks who were on marijuana and heroin at supposedly higher rates than everyone else, which was not true. So I gave a little, got on my soapbox there, Leo. Anything you want to say about the clip or anything I had to say?
Oh, no. I mean, I think you are, discussing things in the right vein. And I'm just fascinated by just all the discussion of these issues. And I am reminded as we talk about this, Nixon and his play, again, sometimes I've said that, and someone else said it too, that if Trump isn't a racist, he wants people to think he's a racist.
I agree with you 1,000% with that, because I think he's the biggest grifter, and whatever looks like a win, he knows he's an expert at using the language to attach to that. That's why I say in his first term, he touted out different black groups and attached to them. Came to Atlanta and had his black agenda said here specifically in Atlanta. If it's not the king of a showmanship, that's the king of showmanship.
I mean, but even before that,
180 Trump this term, because I think he's just the perfect grifter. Look, in my eyes. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, these are the block and tackle things that sometimes people, your listeners too, might sometimes be frustrated with me because I'm sharing block and tackle strategy. That's the actual stuff. When someone says it looks like this tree got hit by a hammer, right? Because they walked up onto the tree after the tree already had a dent in it. I'm there when the tree is getting hit, and I'm like, it was a golf club, right? And then they go, what? No, it looks like, well, no, I actually saw it. I was there. Okay. So that's what often happens. So Nixon probably isn't a racist. Okay. Because that's what people see after they walk into it, and then they see what happens in an after effect. But Nixon.
Let me cut you on 1 second. I'm bad about cutting people off, but I want to say this to be real clear and real nuanced on this. As I highlighted, he saw in his eyes blacks and the hippies. So clearly it ain't about
correct.
Right. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not, but I'm just saying
because Nixon became a hardcore anti. So let's say this.
Who won't vote for me. So he went out.
So I'm going to say,
that wouldn't vote for him, which was in his eyes, the blacks and the hippies would not vote for him. So
now let's be more specific. Let's be more specific to ideology.
Okay.
Nixon really took a hard stance against communism as one of his political strategies, but I think that that's more a part of his belief set. I think he is anti-communist.
Okay.
So, and I think when people that's the same mistake people make about Martin Luther King. When Martin Luther King opens himself to the study of communism,
right,
and actually says, he actually literally said he's an anti-communist.
He did.
He said that. Yeah, but because he was willing to study it, and the racists wanted him to be a communist so that other people like Nixon could hate him, right? So it's all that. So what we all need to understand, and most of your audience is a highly engaged, pretty intellectual audience. They understand that, and what you're making clear is, folks, sometimes people are attaching something to people just for the political strategy of it, not because it's true. And so now we got Nixon. And so you might be describing with this Nixon stuff, the development of politics based on perception rather than politics based on reality. Because Nixon fully embraced the dog whistle, right? He fully embraced, okay, white people are pissed off about black people getting stuff. So I'm now going to act like I'm against all the things that might be social progress for black people, all the social systems and the government sponsored systems that are supporting black uplift and empowerment. I'm going to act like I'm against it. Now, meanwhile, Nixon was doing things like holding the Fairmont conferences, the Fairmont Institute. These were black-centered California conferences for black leaders that became really famous and popular. Thomas Sowell developed out of them. Even Clarence Pendleton from the Urban League, black civil rights leader Clarence Pendleton. The likes of Ron Brown and Vernon Jordan are all like continuations of the Fairmont Institute.
Okay.
So Google that, people. Look that up if you want to learn more about the other side of Nixon that he was hiding. Because he didn't want the white folks to know that he believed in that kind of life too. So he was creating access for black people, Nixon was, even while he was dog whistling all this stuff about black people bad.
Hey, straight no chaser. That's what you come to Politically Conscious for. All right, let me play this second clip from by Freddie as well. And I want to highlight again the opportunity to support urban intellectuals. I've been using their flashcards for so many years now. I can't even remember the number of years. I don't want to make the number up on everybody, but they've been an integral part of the Mental Dialogue Community Club, of a lot of the history that we try to teach people when they come to our live experience. Again, this is more parts from Freddie talking about what he felt like Nixon did. And again, I think some of this stuff sounds very familiar to today. So that's why we're doing this deep dive.
Listen. Let's talk about the 8 ways that he undermined Black America. Number 5, Nixon slowed the push for school desegregation. See, after Brown versus Board of Education, this country was supposed to dismantle segregated schooling, but white resistance was fierce. And Nixon leaned into this resistance, right? Instead of aggressively pushing for equal education, he often tried to slow things down, soften enforcement, and appeal to people's anger about integration. Number 6, he attacked busing. Busing was one of the tools courts used to address segregated schooling. But Nixon made opposition to busing a major political issue. He knew it appealed to white suburban fear. See, and when politicians say neighborhood schools in a country where neighborhoods were shaped by segregation, redlining, and racial exclusion, we have to understand what this all really means. Number 7, he repackaged racism as concern about welfare, crime, and the urban disorder. This is one of the most important parts of the playbook. So you do not have to say black people if the audience already knows what you mean. So you say welfare, you say crime, you say urban crisis, you say dependency, you say taxpayers, you say law and order. And suddenly anti-black policy sounds like public safety. Suddenly racial sentiment sounds like fiscal responsibility. Suddenly punishment sounds like common sense. Number 8, he offered black capitalism instead of real structural repair. See, Nixon talked about black businesses. He promoted black capitalism and yes, supported black business matters. But black capitalism without serious repair can become a way to avoid talking about land theft, stolen labor, job discrimination, housing discrimination, school inequality, and wealth extraction. You cannot tell people to just start businesses while ignoring the system that blocked their capital, that blocked their neighborhoods, that blocked their schools, that blocked their wealth for generations. So when we talk about Nixon, we're not just talking about one president. We're talking about a playbook that turned the civil rights into backlash, a playbook that turned protest into crime, a playbook that turned integration into fear, a playbook that turned poverty into personal failure, a playbook that turned black demands for justice into threats against America. And if this sounds familiar, it is because the playbook never went away. It just got updated. This is why Black history matters. This is why understanding matters. Because if we do not study the playbook, we will keep getting played by it. This is Urban Intellectuals, and it must be defended. We're calling on 1,000 defenders of Black history, 1,000 people that believe in the mission of Urban Intellectuals to join us in saving the company, in saving the mission. We're asking 1,000 defenders to contribute $100. For your $100, you'll gain 100 days of access to our Black history classes for adults or children. Look, all donations are welcome. If you can give more, please give more. If you can give less, give less. But don't sit on the sidelines while Black history is being under attack. Help us save Urban Intellectuals. Comment the word defend or click the link in our bio to protect this mission. Till next time, good people, love, peace, and power to the people.
So I want to shout that brother out. I am absolutely going to become a defender. Let me put up his website, Urban Intellectuals. If anybody else feels the need to support a company that's been, again, bringing Black history in very unique ways. They got some Black history games that we use at our game nights at the live experience. Again, I've had that brother on and I wanted to support his cause. And so today I will be pledging my 100 as one of the 1,000 defenders to help save that company, because I have always understood the importance of our youth, specifically our Black youth. I'll say that to anybody out there, that being properly esteemed. I don't think that the 12 years of public school education does that well enough. And I always say, if your child is properly esteemed, they can fight against any ism. Whatever ism you choose to choose with the proper esteem, you'll be just fine. And so you don't have to agree with that, but I'm just highlighting, I feel like Urban Intellectual does a great job of assisting you as a parent to make sure your child is properly esteemed from this standpoint. You just need to see enough history of what your ancestors have done to know that you came from something. Once you know you came from something, there's nothing you can't do. So it's a little small sprinkle, and I think Urban Intellectual does a good job. So I wanted to highlight them and pledge my support live on the air. Any thoughts about the clip or anything?
It sounds like he does a good job. Looks like a worthy effort. And urbanintellectuals.com. I'll check it out myself. I think this guy is speaking from well-researched, well-understood history. I would challenge any discussion of Black history as it relates to America to be reasserted as American history, because the people who really would benefit from that knowledge. I mean, everybody needs the knowledge, right? Yeah, to say to someone that, I believe in a Black capitalistic opportunity, right? Which is funny because he then reinforced what I said about Nixon and
absolutely
to the Fairmont Institute and Black capitalism. That's exactly right, which is the right thing to do. It's just not, but as I always describe people about Reconstruction 1, is one thing to hit a man with your car and then say, I won't hit him anymore.
Right.
But he's still laying in the side of the road with a broken leg, back, whatever. You never sent the ambulance. And not only that, did you not send the ambulance? And some could argue that post-Reconstruction, post-slavery, that the ambulance was sent. Social programs, right? Da, 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 da.
Okay.
But
Okay.
you still now are saying he never got hit.
Right.
You're now saying that. So when you
Right.
don't address the land theft, when you don't address the theft of labor, da 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 da, then you're really acting like, well, I never really hit him.
Right.
And that is
Absolutely.
the consciousness that the gentleman at Urban Intellectual is bringing out. Nixon could only do the black capitalism thing because that was the safest way for him to hold true to what I believe is his true values, right?
Okay.
Without upsetting that base of voters that he needed to assuage as well. This is the same reason why Donald Trump, again, can come up with the opportunity zone. He can come up with some appointments. He can do a project that he did for my work where he gave basically reparations. People don't know this. Donald Trump gave reparations to the Gullah and Geechee in South Georgia so that we reestablished a black harbor that Donald Trump funded. But he can't talk about that because his racist side of the crowd, the MAGA crowd, would be very upset about that. Buddy Carter, our senator from down there, our congressman from down there, he would have gotten into serious trouble if they knew he did that work with me and black people. So the point is that here's the challenge today, and this is what I challenge historians and people who like to talk about history all the time. And you know this about me, Montoya. Okay, that's the history. We kind of know it. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of young people who don't know it. They got to be taught it. But if you're 40, 50 years old and you're educated somewhat, you kind of know that we never dealt with the real damage of slavery. Because consciously, as the first clip you showed with the Caucasian guy talking about confirmation bias, cognitive dissonance caused by, oh crap, when we really did establish our power through this thing. Nobody wants to like keep that in the back of their mind. They want to think that I am great just because I'm great, not because of some unfair advantage I had, right? So it makes sense that white folks would want to forget about slavery. They want to forget about the land grab. They want to forget about that. And you're going to see a promulgation of movies in the future because of who now? I mean, Elon Musk is now a trillionaire. You got people like Peter Thiel. You got people with heavy money who have influence over Hollywood just as like anybody else. Now they're going to start creating their movies where they're going to talk about black slave owners. They're going to talk about black people who made a ton of money in oil and exploited the native Indians. They're going to create a fiction to muddy the water about what white folks did. That's self-preservation.
That's coming. That's coming.
And it's coming. Right.
Absolutely coming.
Because
and,
the sickness only goes further and further, right? The sickness just goes further and further because you got to justify how an apartheid white separationist like Elon Musk can come over, take advantage of American society. And the way that Elon is doing it is in part by not getting people to rebel against him. And the fact that he is into socialistic capitalism. Elon is a pure benefactor of socialism in an elite way. Okay. And so, for the way for him to keep the white folks from being upset with him, he has to find a group of people that white people are afraid of. And then he manipulates that. And that is exactly what Elon is doing right now.
And that's the playbook that we constantly talk about.
And the so what, Montoya, and I want to get to the so what, because I kind of get tired of folks always bringing up history. So it's like, okay, now that you know that, now what?
Yeah. Let me say this real
quick.
What
do we do with that now?
Let me say this real quick, just to highlight something that you already highlighted. I just want to just really make this point and let it hit home because I don't think enough people have heard this, and then we can definitely go into what you just said. I just wanted to piggyback something that you mentioned when you first started speaking about it really should just be incorporated to American history. I felt like about 4 years ago when we had all the CRT conversations, I railed against that because I felt like it was one of these political racial plays to avoid the history that our entire country needs. Like I always tell people, as someone who loves history myself and very much love history, I always tell people Carter G. Woodson would have turned over his grave when his Black History Negro Week got turned into a Black History Month in the early 70s, I think. If I remember, I forget the exact date. I forget the date. Forgive me for not remembering the date, but it was like in the 70s. It got turned into Black History Month. I was like, Carter G. Woodson would turn over his grave over that. The reason he was getting the historical facts and artifacts, that what happened was he started finding these facts out and was like, dang, there must be more. Why have I never learned any of these things? And so he just made it his personal life mission to find all these real life historical things that had happened in America that was not talked about nowhere in the, newly becoming public education, because we are one of the first countries in the world to even have the concept of public education. And so Carter G. Woodson makes it his lifetime goal to learn all these history facts, but with the belief that this is actually American history, so it should be incorporated into all history. He came up with the Negro History Week, in his eyes, honoring the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, because from his perspective, they had done the most for Black people at the time. So he did call it Negro History Week. But his goal was for all of those artifacts to be incorporated into American history. So that's why I highlight.
But then what happened? What happened with that goal? So that goal, which is transcendent, which is systemically engaged in the development and shaping of America, right? Which is cross-partisan, right? So that goal by a pure and natural intellectual leader, Carter G. Woodson, was usurped by what? Politics. Gerald Ford needed a way as a Democrat to get this idea that Democrats are for Black people. So he threw us a little bone, Black History Month. That's what Gerald Ford did. So in other words, sometimes this is the challenge with leadership that comes in and takes advantage of a vulnerable and marginal people, and seems like they're coming in on the white horse, but they're really just using us for their own purposes. So if Gerald Ford had respected Carter G. Woodson and his perspective, he might have said, you know what? Okay, Mr. Ford, Woodson, I'm listening to you, Dr. Wilson, doctor. And okay, so you don't want this to become separate from America history. And he might have backed off of that pursuit, but he wasn't, because he needed it in order, he needed it. So it's just like you get a Democratic candidate today that's white, that hears that Black people might think Ebonics is cool. And then next thing you know, they got legislation. Ebonics should be implemented as another language in America. And, they don't believe it at all, but they know that there's a group of Black people who might think that's cool. And so even if it's not helpful, this is how we get caught up as basically lemmings and also the cows in politics, because we're not understanding why the white powered liberal or the white Democrat or the white conservative, or that matter of fact, we're not understanding always why they're doing certain things that relate to us and how we might have influence over that. So to get access to those political tables, to get access to the influence, to get access to the room where the strategy is actually forming, to get access to Gerald Ford's office to the point where you can say, President Ford, that's not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
That requires capitalistic power. If you don't have the intellectual or the voting base power to be able to influence that president or that governor, then you better have the capital. I believe that you got to do both. I believe that Black people don't have enough financial leverage to influence in a large horizontal way. So we need to look for candidates and people who believe in leveraging vote and who are smart about it. And then we can vertically grow them with concentrated resources to that select candidate, right? Instead of trying to throw money to 1,000 candidates running in democracy.
Right.
We only need a few that can get to Congress and argue our case, that can get to a White House, has the ability to pull a White House meeting.
I'm such a fan of that. I'm such a fan of that. There have been organizations that I've played around with in the past, and I often felt like they were talking about political power specifically for our community. And personally, Leo, I would, go listen or whatever, and I always thought they were throwing their net too wide.
Well, because you have to throw your net wide if you don't want accountability. Let me explain that. If someone says to me, Leo, I want you to hit opposite field, you're at your baseball, I want you to hit opposite field on every shot. You'd be like, oh, yeah, but that's predictable. No, an opposite field shot into outfield leads to more bases than any other place on the field, but it's also the hardest baseball hit to make. So you're a lot of baseball players, oh, no, it doesn't matter. I'm not, I can spray my ball anywhere. That's not what it calls for. We know you can throw your money to any candidate that's Democrat, right? But can you throw your money in a concentrated way that is more likely to lead to wins? Can you put your money on, can you find that person, commit to them, and say there is a prototype, there is a persona, there is a prototype. Now, what's hard for Black people to make that kind of commitment is because white people are going to tell you, no, that's not your prototype. They're going to define them for you.
You're going to be up against. You're going to be up against that.
It is always going to be the weaker, compromised persona.
Yeah, like those who are against you are going to make the political play to try to encourage you not to make the effective political play. That's the game.
So, so the white liberals will say, "Don't." Leo has access to Governor Kemp, but don't side with him because white liberals will lose power. Even though Black people will gain power if a Black conservative with a friend like Governor Kemp could actually help with Black people. But white liberals don't want that because Democrats might be then seen as, wait a minute, we're not all that in a bag of chips to Black folk. We got a Republican Black guy helping Black people. No, we can't have that.
Hey, I don't, as I've been saying since you met me, I don't think we should have a political home as African Americans as a strategic political play. So I'm definitely up for what you're talking about, but you're talking about the actual strategies and not always, like I said, not always aware that the divisiveness in both parties. That's why I don't think we should have such a political home. We're throughout history, we've had a political home. It is now serving us, in my opinion, not to have a political home. But for the sake of time, I'm going to play this last clip and give you one.
And before you do that last clip, I we'd be remiss because I'm coming from Atlanta, right? And it would be remiss to not point out that Coretta Scott King, Reagan, and Nixon all had pretty strong positive relationships. And both Reagan and Nixon signed a lot of civil rights legislation. Okay. So the point is that at least Coretta Scott King understood the nuance of politics, that you get in it to get what you need. Right. And that, and we need to get better at that because here's what's about to happen. And I know because we're about to close out. So I want to say this before we close out.
Yeah, please do. No, absolutely.
You're going to get an opportunity if it's played right, if the progressive left plays it right, if the Democrats play it right, you're going to get an opportunity to really reassert to the other side, the yin and the yang, the ebb and the flow. So we're now in the racist white fear modality, right? That's the power. That's where the power base lands. That's where all the power is. After this midterm, it could very well swing back the other way. And then when the next presidential election happens, it could very easily become a Democrat president with a Democrat House and Senate.
Right.
But are you going to waste your opportunity, Black people, in the way you wasted it with Joe Biden because you don't have a strategy? Figure out how to have the right persona and personas of people who can actually be at the table of power with Joe Biden, someone better and more connected than Hakeem Jeffries, and more intellectually smart than Hakeem Jeffries to get actual stuff done for Black people. So Black people, let's start thinking about how we can prepare for that.
No, I love it. And I think this clip is a great way to end. And it's only a 2-minute clip. So if you want to give a comment, we out of here after this clip. Thank y'all. Thank you for a great show, Leo. Thank you all of you out there watching. They've been going back and forth individually, so I didn't pull up too many clips. Put too many comments today, but we usually try to interact with y'all a lot more. Again, I don't like y'all attacking each other. I'm not telling you what to do in the comments, but if you want to get on the show, making a comment about what we're talking about, absolutely will get you on the show, if you will. Let me play this last clip and we're out of here. See y'all next week. All right.
In so many ways, the MAGA agenda actually flies directly in the face of American greatness. So when you look at the acronym MAGA, Make America Great Again, it refers to some past condition when we were great. And that nostalgia is generally reserved for the 1950s. So America had won World War II. We established ourselves as the world's preeminent superpower. Our boys were coming home. They were getting educated through the GI Bill. We saw a massive expansion of single-family homes and suburbia, which led to a tremendous amount of wealth accumulation. Now, even today, about 70% of all personal wealth is tied up in real estate holdings. Now, of course, this was to the exclusion of some groups. If you were Black and you were in a redlined area, for example, you weren't able to get a loan and generate that intergenerational wealth. If you were a woman, you were largely sidelined from economic activity, even though women had clawed their way into the workforce in factories during World War II. And obviously, if you were gay, you lacked all sorts of rights. So the 1950s weren't awesome if you were a marginalized group. But there were a lot of great things about the 50s. We were highly engaged in the world as a country. We built back Europe with the Marshall Plan. NATO was established in 1949. And the United States was really seen as the great moral leader of the world. Of course, now we have recoiled, we're more likely to threaten our NATO allies, and we become increasingly isolationist. And we also seemed to share a collective dream for one another in the 50s. The top marginal tax rate during that time for anyone making $200,000 or more was 91%. 91%. There were actually 24 tax tranches based on income. And now, of course, the top rate is 37%, and we've just lowered that for billionaires. So we're actually moving in the opposite direction towards greater income inequality. Now, a lot of those revenues in the 50s funded the development of some of the greatest American institutions. So in the 50s and 60s, we saw the Peace Corps develop under Kennedy. There was the establishment of the National Endowment for the Arts, public broadcasting, the NIH, the CDC. There was a massive expansion of our public universities. NASA was founded in 1958. Now, these institutions were rooted in the belief that government can and should play a constructive role in building a great society. And of course, these were the institutions of American greatness, but it's these very same institutions that are now being totally gutted and defunded. So as you can see, the most potent aspects of American greatness are now being disassembled by the very people that claim to actually want to reinstantiate that greatness.
Hey, any comment? And we out of here. Thought it was a good clip to end today's show, though.
Very, very good clip. And it gets, again, us back into the block and tackle of policy. I'm going to check out that urbanintellectuals.com site. It looks like some good stuff is there. And thank you, Montoya, for having me today.
If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. See y'all next week. Thank y'all for watching.